Each year, our commencement dinner is highlighted by the personal reflections offered by our honored guests. Typically, these reflections relate in full or in part to that piece of the special guest's personal narrative that we'll hope to recognize through the honorary degree conferral. They're always very thoughtful, moving, and compelling. With this as context, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first honored guest this evening. There are two words that immediately come to my mind when I think of Monica Coenraads, and they are devoted and mother. As we all know, there's no more potent force than a devoted mother, and Monica Coenraads exemplifies that role. Monica's story is an intensely personal one, which she shares with her family who join us this evening. I'd first like to give a warm welcome to Monica's family who are here tonight, her husband Peter, her two sons Alex and Tyler, her daughter Chelsea, who is accompanied by Kelly Matthews, and her parents, Piero and Augusta Marini. Could you please welcome the Coenraads family? It's really wonderful that all of you can be here. From speaking to Monica, I know her world revolves around her family and that she's made a world of difference because of the love she has for them. Monica Coenraads serves as the executive director of the Rett Syndrome Research Trust. Now, this title, while denoting a leadership role, obscures the immense impact a devoted mother has had in moving forward an entire field of research. As one of the leading Rett syndrome researchers said of Monica's contributions, it's difficult to overestimate her impact in catapulting Rett syndrome research to the forefront of biomedical research. Monica, along the journey from devoted mother to leading advocate, you've helped to raise more than $41 million for Rett syndrome. $41 million. You've energized an entire field of research, and most importantly, you've given those living with the condition and their families the most elusive gift of all, hope. It's our hope that your example of devoting yourself to your family and the Rett syndrome community, we hope that that will inspire our graduates to devote themselves similarly in service to others. Would you all please join me in welcoming Monica Coenraads to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm kind of speechless, honestly, with this honor that you are bestowing on me. I feel a bit undeserving, to be honest with you, but thank you so very, very much. So the chancellor said, don't bring any notes, just speak from the heart. And so I kind of purposely didn't prepare too much. I thought I would just stand up here and kind of tell you what's in my heart. So in February of 1986, just a few miles from here, a 16-year-old boy took his life. He was in high school, he was on the football team, he had everything to live for, but he killed himself. And his parents, in a gesture of extreme courage and extreme generosity, donated his organs. And my father, who was very, very sick at the time with hepatitis, received his liver. My parents had just bought a restaurant. And my father, with this liver transplant, ended up in Pittsburgh at Presbyterian Hospital, which was the place where you go to have liver transplants. And it was in and out of the hospital for about a year. And my mother was with him. So there was this brand new restaurant and nobody to run it. And so my brother, who had just graduated with a bachelor's degree and was working for a commercial real estate company, and I, who was 23 years old and had just gotten my MBA and was working in a corporate finance job, we quit our jobs and we took over this fledgling restaurant. Neither one of us knew anything about running a restaurant, but we said, okay, we got to do this because my parents aren't here, and we kind of took it over. And that was 10 years of my life. We worked this restaurant, it got busier and busier, and I learned so many lessons about how to run a small business, how to manage a staff of people, how to have confidence in myself. It was an amazing 10 years. It was a lot of hard work, but I learned incredible life lessons that ended up helping me later on. And right around the time that this was all happening, I also met my husband, Peter. We got engaged, we got married, but because I was working about 100 hours a week, we decided to put off having children until we sold the restaurant, which we did 10 years later. And right on schedule, we got pregnant, and our daughter Chelsea was born. And the first year was absolutely glorious. She was, gorgeous little girl. She was born a few weeks early. She was tiny. The nurses on the floor called her the little peanut. She was 5 pounds, 13 ounces, tons of blonde hair. But everything proceeded according to what you would expect with a new baby. She was hitting her milestones. Everything was looking wonderful. I was home, not working for the first time in my life. And I was devoting all of my energies to Chelsea. Right about a year, when she turned about a year, I started to have little twinges that something just didn't feel right. She wasn't pulling up to standing. I felt that she was not learning things at the appropriate speed. And, but I tried to, not be a first-time worrywart mother. The doctors didn't seem at all worried. They all kept telling me how kids develop on their own timeline, and please don't worry, you're just being neurotic. And so I said, okay, maybe I am. I'm not going to worry. My husband and I were celebrating our 10-year anniversary, and he surprised me with a trip to Barbados. And Chelsea came with us. And we got to this gorgeous island, and Chelsea was not a very happy baby. She screamed the whole time we were there. She was only happy in her hotel room with the drapes drawn and in her crib. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to be touched. She didn't want to be in the water. And there was a family that we met there who had a daughter that was the exact same age as Chelsea. She was 15 months old. And this little girl was doing, she was walking and talking and eating with a fork. And here was Chelsea, who wasn't doing any of those things. And my husband and I looked at each other and we said, oh my gosh, there is something really terribly wrong here. And so when we got home from that rather hellish 10-year anniversary vacation, I started trying to figure out what was going on with our daughter. And so we started calling pediatric developmental pediatricians and neurologists and geneticists, and we started trying to figure out what was going on. Nobody mentioned Rett syndrome. We started doing blood tests and all sorts of tests. And I was in a listserv of moms who all had babies in October of 1996. And one of those moms emailed me. And she said, my next door neighbor has a daughter with Rett syndrome. Look it up. See if any of the symptoms make sense. And I did that. I looked it up. And I said, oh my gosh. As I was mentally checking off symptom after symptom after symptom. We were living in Virginia at the time, and at Johns Hopkins there was a Rett syndrome clinic. And so we took Chelsea there. And the neurologist was not used to seeing 17-month-old kids with Rett syndrome. Usually the symptoms take a long time to appear, and by the time somebody brings up Rett syndrome, they're usually 3 or 4 years old. Here was a 17-month-old girl, and she said to me, no, she doesn't have Rett syndrome. She's still transferring objects from one hand to the other. And long story short, well, what she said to me was, go home and come back in 6 months. And I thought to myself, 6 months? How does she think I'm going to get through the next 6 months, not knowing what's going on with my daughter? And of course, I couldn't go through 6 months, so I was back in her office 3 months later. She still said, no, I don't think it's Rett syndrome. 6 months later, we went back, and Chelsea had developed more of the Rett symptoms, and she diagnosed her with Rett syndrome. A year later, the gene was found, and she tested positive. She had the most common mutation in the Rett gene, which is called MECP2. By the time she got the diagnosis based on the genetic syndrome, it was a relief to me, because I was already quite invested in the fact that she clinically had been diagnosed with Rett syndrome. I had connected with other like-minded parents. I had talked to many scientists and tried to figure out, what can we do to try to push the science forward. And I had already was on the brink of starting a research foundation. The same month that we started our research foundation was the same month that Dr. Huda Zogby from Baylor identified MECP2 as the gene mutations causing Rett syndrome. And it was, as I said in the video, it was a great time to get involved, because the field blew open, and there were so many people that were starting to get involved. So in the beginning, my goal was not to start a research foundation. I had never really thought about it. My goal was, what can I do to make things go quicker? But scientist after scientist that I talked to, and people that had started various research organizations for lots of varying diseases, had started to give me advice, and I kind of put together a roadmap of what I thought were some important things that should happen next. And so I kind of, if you could say this, kind of stumbled on starting a research organization. And now it's 16 years later. And I think the Rett syndrome research field is really not recognizable as where it was 16 years ago. Now there are hundreds of laboratories around the world that are studying Rett syndrome. And although in the lay community, and even somewhat in the medical community, it still is rather unknown, I would say that in the scientific community, it's a fairly high-profile disease. And it is because of a number of reasons. Number one, we have a gene, right? So unlike autism and schizophrenia and MS and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, well, there's probably lots and lots of genes and environmental predispositions. In Rett syndrome, it's a one-gene disorder, and so that really makes it attractive from a scientific viewpoint. We have really good animal models that faithfully recapitulate the symptoms that we see in our children. We have the prospect of reversibility. In 2007, Adrian Bird from the University of Edinburgh showed that in a mouse model that is lacking the Rett gene, MECP2, if you turn it back on, all of the symptoms go away, even in late-stage disease. And so, as you can imagine, this was an experiment that just completely surprised not only the scientific community, but us, the parents, and gives us great hope for the potential of treatments and a cure. So we have the prospect of reversibility. We have high-profile scientists that are working on Rett syndrome, that are publishing in high-profile journals, that are speaking at high-profile meetings, and that's helped to elevate the awareness about the disease. And I think finally, it's a high-profile disease because we are pursuing a multitude of strategic approaches to curing Rett syndrome. And I want to just mention a couple of those. So one of them is gene therapy, which makes sense, right? It's a single gene disorder. We know the gene that's mutated, and so it makes sense that in order to treat it, if we could deliver healthy copies of this gene, we would really be targeting the root cause of the disease. And so that's an approach that we're taking. Another approach that we're taking is because the Rett gene is on the X chromosome and it affects girls, that means that in every cell of a girl with Rett syndrome, in every cell where the gene is mutated, there is also a healthy gene that's on the silent, inactive X chromosome. And if we could find a way to turn that gene back on, in theory, we treat the disorder. And so that is what Michael Green is working on from UMass. And I first heard about Michael's work in 2008 and invited him to a meeting, and he's been kind of hooked ever since. And I will say that this is an approach that industry is really quite interested as well, because it would probably be a small molecule compound. And so this is an area that for years I tried to get some traction on. And finally, around 2008, we started to fund various labs, Michael's lab being one of them. And I think, this is an area that I'm extremely enthusiastic about. We're also funding a number of projects looking at downstream targets, various neurotransmitters, and various pathways that are affected when you have a Rett syndrome, an MECP2 mutation. We're funding a number of clinical trials. We're getting more involved in clinical research now, natural history studies, outcome measure development, all of the things that when I was naive 10 years ago, I would say to myself, outcome measures, what do you mean? If we test a drug in my daughter, you don't think I'd know whether she got better or not? But now, all these years later, I realize how important things like sensitive outcome measures are, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir to most of you. You know what I'm talking about. So starting doing the work that I do for the past 16 years has been it's been hard. I kid you not, it is a lot of work, but it's also been extremely therapeutic for me, because Rett syndrome makes parents feel so helpless. And I can't wait to get to work every morning when I wake up. I can't wait to get to my computer. I can't wait to see what emails are going to come my way, or what phone calls, or what I'm going to learn, who I'm going to talk to. And it's just been an incredible 16 years. And despite the $41 million that we've raised, which is wonderful, but yet in drug development, it's a drop in the bucket. Despite, all the wonderful things that have happened over the last 16 years, I'm still very, very cognizant of the fact that my daughter and all the other children with Rett syndrome and adults with Rett syndrome don't yet have anything to help them. And until that happens, until we have something that makes their lives better, we can't rest. And that's the first thing that I think about in the morning when I wake up, and it's the last thing that I think about when I go to sleep. We're just not there yet. And but I am incredibly optimistic. There's been so much progress in the last 10 years, and especially the last 5 years. And so I am filled with a sense of optimism, and I know that we're going to get there. Since I have everyone's attention, I'm also going to take this opportunity to thank my family. I've been, I'm as many of you here are, no doubt, I'm just incredibly busy. I have a home office, which works for me because I can help to manage my daughter's care as well as work. I do some travel, but most of the time I'm home. But I think it's hard for my boys to kind of really understand what it is I do. They know that I'm really busy and I'm often distracted. I'm on the phone and I'm doing email, and it's, hold on, I'll be with you in a minute. And I just want to thank them for their patience. My parents, who have been there supporting me and stepping in to help with my daughter every step of the way, I want to say thank you. My husband, who's been incredibly patient and kind of let me do whatever it is I need to do. And finally, my daughter. When I describe Chelsea to people, she's in a wheelchair, she doesn't speak, she can't use her hands, she has a feeding tube, she has seizures, she has anxiety, she doesn't sleep, she has orthopedic issues, she has muscle contractures. People get this picture of a very vulnerable child, in their mind. And actually, she is anything but. She is the most powerful, courageous, patient, full of wisdom, old beyond her years, wise beyond her years, person that I know. And she inspires me each and every day. And I think without ever saying a word, she's managed to do so much, through me. And she's not the only one. There's lots of other lots of other children with Rett syndrome that are doing the same thing, through their parents. I can only do my work because so many other parents of children with Rett syndrome are fundraising for us. And those children are inspiring those parents in the same way that Chelsea is inspiring me. So I just want to, Chelsea, if you're listening, I just want you to know how much I love you. We're not finished yet, but we're going to get there. Thank you.
somebody just,
I hope that's what